couldn't. I love the night. That's the only time I feel really alive.
That's what David wanted.
Blood, I was to find, was a necessity as well.
A vampire in love with a slayer. It's rather poetic. I am the monster the breathing men would kill. I am Dracula.
Good evening, my fellow vampire lovers. The sun is going down, and you know what that means. It's time for me to record another episode of my podcast, The Beautiful Dead. As always, I'm your host, Lena Nazari. You can go to lenanazari.com, but who goes to websites anymore? Just go to the Beautiful Dead podcast at Instagram. That's where you can reach me the quickest, and that's where you can see what I'm up to. So I actually had to cancel GalaxyCon in New Orleans this July, unfortunately, but my youngest is headed off to college, so that kind of shifted priorities, but that is okay because I just got back from Philly and I will be doing an event at the Vampire and Paranormal Museum, Vampa, in Philly, October 25th, which I am very excited for. And I have a few other things that are kind of up in the air right now. As soon as I know, you will know. But for now, everything's kind of on hold. Both of my children are leaving the home this summer, so I want to spend time with them before they're gone. And I have a book I need to finish. So priorities have shifted, but I promise I'm going to get this book out by spooky season. And then I will, of course, be at all the things I can possibly be at in September and October and even November. So I will keep you updated. All right, gang. I know that this was supposed to be out on Sunday the 1st, but again, life happened. But I did watch it, and we're going to round out the Karnstein trilogy here. For those of you who don't know, we already did The Vampire Lovers, and then I did Twins of Evil last week and didn't realize that that was another Karnstein thing. So I looked it up and said, oh my goodness, there's 3 of them. Now, yes, it's a trilogy. Yes, they came out a year apart, but it's not consecutive events. It's just 3 movies within 3 years that all involve Miracalla or Carmilla Karnstein. So that's really all you need to know, I promise. But I'm a completionist, so I said, well, now we have to round it out. So we are going to do Lust for a Vampire. Spoiler alert, if you have never watched this channel, listen to this podcast, massive spoiler alert. I talk about the movie from beginning to end. I tell you who gets turned, who gets killed, who gets knocked up, who has sex with who, all of that stuff. So don't be upset with me if you continue to watch and I ruin it for you. But also, this movie has been out for like 50 years. So where have you been? Let's do it. It is 1830, so that is 40 years after the events that happened in The Vampire Lovers. A beautiful blonde is walking through some sunny woods with a picnic basket and is being watched by someone in a black cloak who's on a carriage. The carriage pulls up and the cloaked figure's in the woods, and then this black carriage pulls up, the cloaked figure gets in the carriage, and then the carriage rolls up on the blonde and the door opens, and she smiles at someone inside and she gets in, but then once she's in, she screams. So we're like right in. We get our title card and opening credits as the coach races through the woods. The blonde is passed out in the carriage, and we arrive to Karnstein Castle. The driver carries the blonde into the castle and lays her on an altar. That doesn't usually turn out well. The man in a man in a black and red cape, who we find out is Count Karnstein in the movie, holds a dagger next to the altar as the hooded figure from the carriage comes in. Within the altar room, they open a coffin to reveal a skeleton. Count Karnstein hands the cloaked figure the dagger, and they slice the throat of the blonde. Count Karnstein calls out to the devil, which we're used to that now with the Karnsteins. Those Karnsteins and the devil. Calls out to the devil as the blonde's blood fills a golden chalice and is carried to the corpse. Cape Man, or caped person, asks the devil to accept the sacrifice of the blood, and they pour the blood into the corpse's mouth. Now the coffin is covered with a sheet as the chanting continues. Lightning strikes, a chorus sings eerily, and the corpse turns into a beautiful woman who sits up, and of course it is Miracalla. Welcome back to the podcast, Miracalla. Now we're in a village. Richard Lestrange is new to town and is told by a villager that the Karnsteins are due to return as they are undead and rise every 40 years. We learn that the Karnsteins prey on young virgins and will sometimes woo them to drain them over time, or will sometimes just kill them very quickly. Richard is told that no young girl will entertain him out of fear and that he should not talk to any beautiful women. But Richard is there to do research on vampires and black magic because he writes supernatural fiction novels. Richard goes to the castle to explore, seeing an upside-down cross on an altar, some fresh blood on the ground. And then he sees a woman in a blue cloak approaching him. And then two other women in cloaks start to approach him. And one of them is blocking his way out. And he starts to kind of panic a little bit. Then a man above everybody calls out to the girls, and they all start to giggle and asks Richard, like, what are you doing here? And we find out that the man who called out to Richard is Giles, and Giles is a teacher at a all-girls boarding school that is on property that abuts the castle. So this is the castle's neighbors. So he has brought the girls to the castle because he's a history teacher, and he's teaching them all about the local history of the Karnsteins. And the girls, I guess, were just being fun and were trying to scare Richard. So now we get to the school, and this is where we see all the girls are very beautiful, and they're all taught important things like manners and how to dance. The principal is Miss Simpson, and then there's Miss Playfair, who is the PE teacher, who is wearing a see-through dress, which I never knew a PE teacher who did that, but okay. And Richard is sort of besotted when he first sees Miss Playfair. Put a pin in that. He's introduced to Miss Simpson, who's happy to have an author nearby, but says, we don't approve of your scary books. Please don't talk to the girls about them. But we would love to have you lecture on English. And he said, well, do you need a teacher? And she said, no, a teacher is due to arrive. And then a carriage approaches with a countess and her niece, Miracalla. And Richard sees Miracalla, and he has completely forgotten about Miss Mayfair, and he is like very in love with Miracalla, and he does not hide it well. Later, we see some of the girls are gossiping about Richard, this handsome man, trying to figure out who he is. Miracalla is in her room, so we can assume she's a student. She was enrolled. Her roommate, Susan, is nice enough to give her a shoulder rub. Anyone who knows Carmilla or knows these movies knows there's a lot of sapphic love in these, and it happens very quickly in this. Miracalla and her roommate, Susan, plan to sneak out that night at midnight and go swimming at the local lake, and then all the girls are told to lights out. So now we're in a pub. And Richard is telling the story of visiting the castle when a woman screams outside. The men run outside to see the woman is dead on the ground and has fang marks in her throat. Miracalla and her roommate are swimming, and Giles is sneaking around on school grounds, but we don't know exactly why yet. And honestly, we never find out why he was out sneaking around. I'm assuming he was watching the girls. Naughty, naughty. The next day at the pub, Richard meets Arthur, who's a huge fan of Richard's, and he's like, I too want to be a writer. And then we find out that Arthur is headed to the school because he is the new English teacher. So Richard is like, actually, I was going to write this new book, and I really need someone to collaborate with me, and I would love for you to do it, but it would mean you have to go to Italy. And then the next scene is Richard telling Miss Simpson that the new history teacher broke his leg, sadly, and is in hospital, and he says, don't worry, I will teach English lit. So Richard has now insinuated himself into the all-girls school. We see that Giles is teaching history, but the girls are not paying attention. Only Miracalla is listening, and that's because the lecture is on the Karnsteins. Richard's lodging on campus is with Giles as a roommate, and that night Giles is coughing and coughing and coughing, and he says, oh, it's from these books. They're very, very old, they're very dusty, but I really need them because I'm studying the Karnsteins, and these are all about Karnstein Castle. And Richard jokes that Giles is training to be a vampire, and Giles says, oh, that's just gossip. Richard's talking about how he saw the dead girl at the pub, and then when he looks up, Giles is just gone. He's just walked out the front door. Now we see Susan, Miracalla's roommate, being murdered, and then Miracalla walking across the school grounds when Richard stops her and tells her, "I love you." Sir, first off, she's a student, you're a teacher. Secondly, you've known her for 15 seconds, and that is very intense. But she seems like she's kind of into him too, but she won't say anything and she leaves. Then we see Giles dragging the dead Susan and throwing her down a well. The next day, Miracalla is explaining to Miss Simpson that her roommate is missing. Miss Simpson says, "Do not tell the other girls, just say that Susie is sick and she's in the hospital." But Miss Playfair hears the whole thing and gives Miss Simpson 48 hours. And she said, "If Susan doesn't come back, I'm going to the police." Now, Giles is teaching them again about the Karnsteins, and he's taken all the girls up to the burial plot, telling them about Carmilla, one of the long-gone Karnsteins. So she died like 120 years before this movie was supposed to be set. And he's explaining that in that time, girls were often given a name that was an anagram of their mother's name. So they're trying to figure out what names the mother could have been. And then somebody goes, "How about Miracalla?" And everyone laughs, but Miracalla does not look pleased. Giles takes her aside and says, "Meet me here at midnight. I found out something you need to know." That night, Giles is at the Karnstein cemetery and Miracalla arrives. And he says, "I know who you are and I know why you're here." He knows that she is a vampire. He pulls out a cross and she pulls back. And then he reverses it, drops to his knees, basically like begs her to teach him the black arts. He says, "I will be your servant. I want to serve you." And she serves his request, or answers his request, by feeding from him, which he seems to enjoy. But she has taken a lot because suddenly he is very pale and very weak, and she leaves in the fog, and he's like trying to crawl after her, but he's just too weak. And then we see that Count Karnstein has been watching this whole thing, and he's smiling. The next morning, the girls are playing outside, and we find Giles dead. His body's under a fallen tree, so it looks like a tree fell on him. And Countess Karnstein just happens to be coming by in her carriage with her private doctor, who's actually Count Karnstein. And she says, "Don't worry, my private doctor will figure it out." And the doctor says, "Heart attack." That night, Miss Playfair visits Richard, and she is very concerned. She's like, "There's a girl missing. Now suddenly a teacher is dead. I just have this really bad feeling that something else is going to happen. More people are going to die." And then she admits to Richard that the story about Susan having a fever and being in the hospital is all a lie. And then he learns that the missing girl's roommate is Miracalla, and suddenly he like draws back and he goes, "I don't think that you should say anything." And Miss Playfair says, "Well, come to the cops with me tomorrow." And he goes, "I need to think about it. I'll tell you tomorrow what I want to do, but in the meantime, don't say anything." Then he goes through Giles's things. He finds books, notes, and pictures, including the book that shows that Miracalla and Carmilla look exactly the same. And Carmilla died, like I said, over 100 years prior. He goes to the room that Giles's body is being kept in and tilts the head to the side and sees the fang marks. The next day, the girls are studying in Richard's class, and he calls Miracalla up to the front, and he whispers, "I've been going through Giles's notes. I want you to meet me tonight at the castle." She does. He admits again that he loves her, and then she's like, "I want you to tell me what you saw in Barton's notes." And he's like, "I saw everything I needed to know." And she's like, "Do you think I'm a vampire?" "No, I'm a Karnstein, but I changed my last name, and that's why I look like Carmilla. And you only think I'm a vampire because of the types of books that you write." And he goes, "No, I think you're a vampire because of all the evidence that shows that you're a vampire." And then he grabs her again, and he says, "I don't care, I love you." She's like, "But if I love you, that means you'll die." And then he kisses her, and we get a love song that I feel like she is singing. It sounds a lot like her. And while they're playing this awful song, he pulls her dress off. They do what adults do. and she manages to complete everything without biting him. So she's got good. When he gets back to his place, Miss Playfair is there waiting. He tells her, I won't support your plan to go to the police. He tells her, say nothing, that all the sinister thoughts in your head are just in your head. They're not real. She leaves upset, and he lays down where he has a dream that's a mix of Miracalla and Miss Playfair, and then Giles rising from the dead. And it's like got all this weird lighting, and that awful song plays again, and it almost feels like an acid trip. It's very bizarre. The next day, a detective is at the school asking why Miss Simpson let 3 days go by without telling the police that a girl is missing. Miss Simpson is crying. The detective does not care. And he says, you're going to write a letter to the family telling them that their daughter is missing. And she's crying and she's writing. And she's like, and he says, while you're at it, I want to see the death certificate for Mr. Barton. Miracalla and Richard meet in secret, and she tells him, like, it shouldn't have happened. I can't see you again. Please leave me alone. And he's like, tell me you don't love me. Tell me you don't love me. And then she kisses him. Miss Playfair shows the detective where Giles's body was found, and he starts to search the grounds. He finds the cemetery, and then he finds the well. Miracalla explains her aunt is coming, and Richard wants to talk to the Countess, but Miracalla is like, swear to me that you will not talk to my family. You will not tell anyone about our love. The detective uses a rope to lower down, searching the well, and finds Susan's body. But before he can climb all the way up, Count Karnstein cuts the rope, and the shot of him falling makes the well look like it is 1,000 feet deep and completely, utterly in darkness. It's so silly. So silly. The Countess tells Miss Simpson to write a follow-up letter to Susan's family, telling them that she's been found dead, and the Countess ensures that the fake doctor will back up the paperwork and tells Miss Simpson not to worry. That night, Richard and Miss Playfair are fighting. She knows that Richard is in love with Miracalla, and she's like, yeah, and so was Susan, and so was Giles, and they're both dead. So if you don't wisen up, you're going to be next. And he's like, why would you care? And she said, because I love you, but you wouldn't know that because your attention is elsewhere. And Miracalla is outside and hears the whole thing. As Miss Playfair walks back into the quarters, she meets up with Miracalla, who mesmerizes the teacher, calling her up the stairs and into Miracalla's room. And whatever Miracalla has planned doesn't happen because Miss Playfair is wearing a cross. So Miracalla runs out. Restraint. The next day, Susan's dad is there. He is pissed. He tried to track down the fake doctor, and guess what? The doctor on the death certificate does not exist. So he wants to know where his daughter is and what really happened, and he brought a pathologist and a warrant for exhumation of his daughter. So Miss Simpson goes to the Countess, and she's freaking out, and the Countess says, don't worry because we handled it. So then we see the grave is dug up. Inside the casket is Susan. The pathologist who's with the dad sees the fang marks and tells the attendants to take the body to be examined. That night, that afternoon, the dad meets with the Countess, who explains that the doctor on the death certificate is her personal doctor. And she tells the father, your daughter threw herself off of Castle Karnstein. We were trying to save you from that knowledge, but you kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Her heart failed because she hit the ground, and that's why there's so much damage to her body. That night, the pathologist and the father are drinking at the pub. The doctor says Susan died from heart failure after the fall, but he doesn't know why she's empty of blood or what the marks on her neck are. But the locals are all gossiping that they know vampires are real. They know the Karnsteins are vampires. Meanwhile, a priest walks into the tavern because he needs lodging for the night. The dad and doctor call him over to the table. Richard is in his quarters drinking. He stumbles to the school and he goes to Miracalla's door and he hears that she has someone in her room. So he starts freaking out, calling her name, pounding on the door, which calls everyone out into the foyer. And we see that she is inside her room feeding on one of her classmates. The doctor, dad, and priest lead a group of villagers to find the vampires with torches in hand. Richard is back in his room and he is out of alcohol, so he stumbles out again. The angry mob is headed to the castle and Richard is walking and sees them, so he goes up and asks one of the local what's going on, and the villager tells Richard they are headed to Castle Karnstein, that they are going to kill the vampire, and they'll know which one is a vampire because every night the vampire has to return to their coffin to sleep. So they just have to wait and see who's in coffins, I guess. Meanwhile, Count Karnstein hears the group coming. Richard begs the priest to please stop the crowd and starts screaming out for Miracalla. Then we see that she is returning to the cemetery, I'm guessing to get some sleep, but the Count and Countess call her into the castle. The crowd has arrived, and we see that the coachman, who's been taking the Karnsteins everywhere, is also a vampire. So the crowd grabs him, pulls him down, and stakes him, and we see that vampires turn to skeletons when they're staked. Then the villagers all start screaming to burn down the castle, and they're like rushing up to the door of the castle with torches in hand. And the priest is screaming like, fire won't kill them, fire won't kill them. And we know that from Twins of Evil. But he's like, we have to behead them or we have to stake them. So we know that about the vampires. But no one is listening. They don't care. So they start burning the castle. Inside, the Count, the Countess, and Miracalla are just kind of stand their arms crossed because they know that fire is not going to kill them. Richard kicks in the door and runs in to save Miracalla, and she yells at him to get out. And the Count sees this, and he's not happy, so he uses like black magic to, I guess, to take over Miracalla. And so she starts to approach Richard, and then her fangs come out, so we know they have 2 sharp canines that are retractable. Her fangs come out, so he pushes her away. She falls down to the ground, and then a ceiling beam breaks off and falls into her chest, staking her, and then she turns into a skeleton. Susan's dad runs in and helps Richard out of the castle as the Count and Countess stand in the burning building. Miss Playfair rushes up to Richard, and they walk together away from the castle as it burns. Yeah. Even as I was reading it, I was like, just reading it is dull. So here's the thing. That one was the most disappointing of the 3. I would have to say Twins of Evil 1, The Vampire Lovers 2, and then this one was the 3rd. It took me 3 times of starting this and trying to get through it. It was just dull. It was just dull. The story is kind of slopping. The acting, excuse me, feels like soap opera. It's overacting. It's very soap opera-y. And it's a beautiful setting, beautiful people, beautiful dresses. All 3 of these are. I mean, Hammer movies know how to do a setting, and they know how to do some wardrobe, that's for sure. That being said, it was just a nothing. It was just nothing. I've said before, bad is one thing, good is great, artsy is okay sometimes, zany, I've seen all kinds of things, but boring is the worst. Boring is the worst, and this one was just boring. There was no resolution, like the roommate, the teacher, and the teacher, and the school peer, the one that she was feeding on at the end, have all been bitten, and they didn't come back. So I don't know, do you have to do the whole devil thing like with Twins of Evil in order to come back? So that was kind of inconsistent. I wish they had done more with the teacher figuring out that she was a vampire, and I wish they had used him a little more before they killed him off. The timeline's very confusing. Like, suddenly the father is there. So how much time has gone by, and when did they find Susan and put her in a coffin, and is the police officer still at the bottom of the well? It just felt very, very sloppy and very loose, and a lot of the acting just kind of felt phoned in. The song was awful. I don't know if I'm going to be able to share it. I don't know if YouTube will let me. I'll try. But it was just awful. I think I need a little break from Hammer for a little bit. We're taking a little Hammer break, okay? There's a time and a place for... Vampire Circus is still my favorite. I will probably go back and watch that one this Halloween. But I just need a little Hammer break. So here's what we're going to do. So, I just got back from Philly, like I said, visiting my favorite video store where Tony from Hack the Movies and I talked about Subspecies. If you've never heard of it, that's okay, don't worry. I covered Subspecies, the first one, my very first season when I was audio only, had no idea what I was doing. I've really wanted to go back and do it again. So here's what we're gonna do. I am gonna start covering the Subspecies movies. There are 5 main movies. There's one spin-off called The Vampire Journals, and then there's 2 spin-offs called Decadent Evil and Decadent Evil 2. I don't know if I want to talk about those. But next week you'll see Subspecies 1. I will completely talk about it from beginning to end, show you clips. Then 2, then 3, then Vampire Journals will be Tony and I together talking about it because chronologically that's where it falls. So it's 1, 2, 3, Vampire Journals, 4, 5. So that's how you will watch it on my podcast. Go over to Tony's channel. I'll let you know when it drops. Follow me on Instagram, and I'll let you know on Instagram and here on YouTube. Tony and I just very briefly talk about each of the 5, and then we decide what is the worst subspecies, and we have a lot of fun doing it. He and I have been talking about doing this video for years, so I'm very excited we finally did it, and I'm very excited for you guys to see it. So that's what's coming up over the next 6 weeks. So I'm very excited for that. And my plan, whenever I recover from, I need to get some rest. I need to climb into my coffin and get some rest. And then I will record all of those. I will batch record them because by the time all 6 of those videos are out on this YouTube channel and you have seen all 6 of them, I want to be done with my 5th book. So I am going to try and get this thing done. And then we will all come back together after Subspecies 5. Maybe I'll talk about Decadent Evil 1 and 2. I don't know. Tony and I watched it last night. I kind of want to block it out of my memory, but maybe I'll talk about it just for funsies. That way we can have the completion of the whole universe having been talked about on this podcast. I don't know. I'll touch base with him and see what he wants to do with it. So I will keep you informed. If you're not following me on Instagram, you're missing out on all the random stuff that I'm constantly doing and thinking about and trying to make work and, you know, what's happening in my personal life. And if you're not, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It really does mean the most to me as I finish out this chapter of my life and start a new one. So thank you all for being here. I love you guys so much. And I wish you wicked hugs and bloody kisses. Good evening.